The Daycare Attendant, otherwise known as Sundrop and Moondrop animatronic, is creepy as all loving hell. He's given me serious vibes that he needs to be dealt with. But what else could there be with this mischievous and, let's be honest, predatory little dude? That's what we're exploring today. Let's do it. Intent possession. This theory comes from Sebi and stuff on the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza fandom page, and they seem to think that the Daycare Attendant is possessed, saying, quote, "Okay, so, as in the FNAF 3 bad ending, we see all the souls in the eyes of the animatronics with 2 lights in the golden Freddy head." A theory which I've already disproven since Crying Child, who is presumed to be the other soul, shouldn't have been introduced yet. This has turned into a theory about Golden Freddy having 2 spirits inside of them. Though now I wanted to bring up who else has 2 white eyes, the Daycare Attendant. Now those eyes don't necessarily glow, but they are 2 blank and empty white eyes, and there are 2 forms of this animatronic. 2 forms, 2 spirits. Now in Security Breach there is a new form to show that the animatronics are possessed, and it's glowing red eyes as a part of the blob. Afton is the excuse since his eyes are purple because obviously it's Afton. Now again, there is something that's part of the Daycare Attendant that shows his possession feature. The Moondrop animatronic has glowing red eyes. End quote. This leads Sebi to conclude that the Daycare Attendant is possessed by 2 different spirits. And while this certainly is interesting, I don't think that it would be the case. The Daycare Attendant doesn't actually have enough of a role in the game to be one of, if not the only possessed animatronic in the game. And again, I've already disproven the 2-eye theory from FNAF 3's bad ending. Link to that video is in the icon. In at 9, the arcade conspiracy. This theory comes from Reddit user Averdict_AV on the game theory subreddit discussing Sundrop and their glitching arcade game. This is because I really like the Daycare Attendant Sundrop and the fact that he is not dangerous and lethal to Gregory, which seems not to be discussed much, but I might have a theory regarding that. My thought is that when we look at the Balloon Boy arcade in Sundrop's room, the Balloon World cabinet, I think it is important that, well, firstly, it's one of the few playable arcade cabinets in the game, but also features a very glitchy section and a glitchy Sundrop. Specifically, only Sundrop was glitched in that game, even though Moondrop and Sundrop are both present within the game. I think this is the reason why Sundrop was not hostile and lethal. I believe that the glitch or the hacks done by presumably Vanny or Gregory to some people that were meant for Sundrop were trapped in that arcade machine. There isn't a glitch Moondrop in the arcade because the glitch or the hack actually got to Moondrop, turning them into a dangerous animatronic. That was meant to turn Sundrop dangerous, but it didn't go through and somehow got stuck in the arcade. When we look at all the other animatronic specific arcade games, not Princess Quest, there is only Monty that is playable, but it does not feature any glitches at all. It just calls back to previous game locations. This is because I believe that the glitch got to Monty already. But if I want to interject here and throw in the fact that the arcade conspiracy note mentions that Chica has an arcade game that's glitching and so does Monty, maybe this theory has a little more juice to it. In at 8, name drop. Get it? Actually, wait, you won't get it yet. You will. Coming from Reddit user The Wizard Muss on the FNAF Theories Reddit page, quote, "I find it really interesting that the Daycare Attendant doesn't have a proper character name, especially given their large enough attractions to advertise with, and in this series most of the animatronics have a proper name unless they're a part of a large group, the Mini Arenas, the Bitty Bats, etc. Music Man would have to be the exception to that until Security Breach, now a fair number of them, but I don't know, maybe there's supposed to be multiple Daycare Attendants? The Pizza Plex is big enough that the daycare would have a lot of kids, and one animatronic probably wouldn't be able to bounce around a group of 20 or so. The only thing that makes me question that is that the parent emails are in the singular when addressing the Daycare Attendant because they're only dealing with one. I'm pretty sure that Freddy also only refers to one attendant." End quote. And while the character is seemingly called Sundrop and Moondrop, those are also the names of candy that they're advertising. So it might be confusing, maybe they're not actually intended to be named those. But it's also interesting to think that no character actually calls them by those names. But Freddy does mention the names of the other animatronics, so maybe there are meant to be more than one, or that the situation is more complex than we realize, or dare I say the situation is mega complex. Get it? Mega Pizzaplex. In at 7, pain. At me making these lists. Is it possible that the daycare attendant actually feels physical pain when transforming? It seems unlikely, but still possible due to the seemingly agonizing screams we hear while Sun transforms into Moon during that cutscene. Fun fact, the animatronic doesn't actually switch. In that cutscene there are two different models, which is why the character falls behind the desk. The only time we actually see the model change between the two is in the Freddy and Friends cartoon. However, is it possible for animatronics to feel pain? It's unclear. I mean, we completely decimate 3 out of the 5 animatronics in the Pizza Plex and they seemingly feel no pain through it, fighting until the very end and then beyond. But Roxy is also programmed for emotional pain, at least on the surface level it appears to be like that. But does this mean that they could have programmed emotional pain and physical pain? We don't know. Maybe the daycare attendant did something wrong, so now switching to the Moon form is painful. Or maybe when he's forcefully changed it's painful, or it could just be that Sun is just fighting to stay in control over Moon, but the change in lighting is just too powerful for him, and that's what that is. He's fighting. And at 6, Puppet 2.0. There is a theory that I've seen on TikTok. I can't remember who made it for the life of me, okay? I try and wipe all other exposure to FNAF out of my memory as fast as possible, especially when it's on TikTok. I don't want FNAF to invade my TikTok. However, this theory stuck with me, and it's the idea that the daycare attendant is a new form of the puppet animatronic first seen in FNAF 2, which is interesting and kind of plausible. I mean, we know that the puppet was meant to be a security bot, and the daycare attendant acts very much like a security guard until the lights go off. And when he kicks us out, he does call for security, and then every hour he roams the Pizza Plex like security, but there's still more to it than that. The Moondrop form of the daycare attendant also flies around on wires, much like a marionette would. Marionette being another word for puppet, but specifically a puppet on strings, which is something also often associated with the puppet from FNAF 2. I mean, how else could they jump from the prize counter to your office? They don't need the strings to move, but they both use the strings to get around quickly when they need to, which is also something that's pointed out on the villains fandom page for the daycare attendant. So maybe it's something that we should be considering. Like I guess we need a surrogate puppet after all, now that Charlotte's put to rest, don't we? No, we don't. Halfway through into number 5, Half Infected. This theory comes to us from Love Nathan Carr on the Game Theory subreddit and proposes an idea as to how just the Moondrop side of the daycare attendant got infected with the Afton virus. Here's a quote from their post. Sundrop seems to be the only one that has no history from what I've seen with the virus. As shown in what behavior he does partake in, he appears to cry when we go missing, he cleans up the place, he tries to entertain us, and he tries to keep us out of trouble. He does not partake in attempting to kill or capture us like the others. The reason behind this is Sundrop and Moondrop are two entities in one body. They have different coding. So let's say the story before the virus came to all the animatronics is that the mall is dark for the entire night because Moondrop is not a problem. He doesn't try to hurt anyone. But then Vanny shows up, and since the animatronics were most likely infected at night, it would make a decent amount of sense. The two sides have different functions and would therefore require separate programming, at least if they are two halves of one whole animatronic. And there's not multiple of them like we discussed earlier. And at 4, Look Out. Now this is a separate theory that I found within the Love Nathan Carr post on the Game Theory subreddit that I wanted to address separately, so quote from later on in that same post, actually it's right after I ended the last quote. The night the virus came, Moondrop was infected with the other animatronics, leaving them with a lust to kill or kidnap. Sundrop figures this out, and at some point he brings it up to the proper authorities. So they make the daycare and the Pizza Plex constantly lit to stop Moondrop. This is where Sundrop gets scared of the lights turning off, as people will get hurt if it happens, end quote. So this user seems to be suggesting that Sundrop knows what Moondrop is doing and tries to stop it from happening, which could explain why he's fighting to stay in control when the lights go out. I don't know, it's certainly an interesting concept, but it relies more on conjecture and assumption rather than evidence, so I'm gonna have to say objection, hearsay on that one. And at 3, The Light. Coming from user ChickNugs on Twitter, they believe that Gregory would actually have been safer with Sundrop in the daycare rather than with Freddy. Quote, unpopular opinion, Gregory was perfectly safe and okay to stay with Sun until 6 AM. Sun most likely would have protected him against anyone else, although Freddy was more caring and thoughtful of what Gregory desired than Sun. Yet it would have been annoying to stay with Sun and be forced to play, but it was undeniably the safest option, apart from staying trapped in Freddy's chest cavity and doing until 6 a.m. as Freddy recharged the entire time. And which, you know what, it's actually a fairly valid point. I'd still say that being in Freddy's green room and sleeping through the night was the best option, since Vanessa never thought to look in there, only figuring out that they were working together after hearing the Fazwatch call out in Freddy's voice. However, this makes another Twitter user going by the name Dante Loyal suggest that the whole he'd be safe with Sundrop thing is the reason the lights get turned off in the first place, and that Vanny was probably the one to do it so that Gregory wouldn't end up being safe. But ultimately, in at number 2, multiple daycare attendants. Now, we kind of touched on this earlier, but there's actually evidence in the game that can kind of help us. Now, we only see one daycare attendant at a time, but there is the possibility that there are multiple within the Pizzaplex. One indication to this possibility is actually within the daycare itself. See, if Gregory tries to return to the daycare after being thrown out, the daycare attendant, as Sundrop, will appear in the slide and throw him out once again. However, the other animatronics will not come if this happens. Interestingly enough though, this can still happen even when Moon is the dominant personality and running around the Pizzaplex, meaning that even if the Moon animatronic is right behind you at the top of the hour, you can still try and get into the daycare and be rejected by Sun, suggesting that there are more than one of this character. But the game is imperfect and there are glitches galore, so we cannot confirm this as an impossibility or a confirmation. So looks like, as per usual in the FNAF series, all we have is idle speculation and propositions rather than any actual solid statements. Wonderful. It's like the FNAF series has IBS with its lore. And finally, in at number 1, aw man. A customer complaint in one of the lore duffel bags that you can find throughout the Pizzaplex has an angry parent revealing that their child, who previously had no sleep-related issues, has begun refusing to sleep with the lights off and started wetting the bed after being left in the daycare. It is implied that said child has been traumatized by the daycare attendant's moon form. But what could this thing have done to traumatize this kid if they were within the confines of the daycare? Sure, when we get the lights off, we get some psycho dude trying to kill us, but when it's an actual daycare session, why is it so traumatizing? Well, that's where the name and number comes in. Yeah, you see, in the Daycare Attendant Mods video, I mentioned multiple times how this dude gives me Chris Hansen conversation need and vibes. And the easiest way to say this without YouTube getting mad is by saying creeper. Aw man, that's right, he's a creeper. I think we all know where I'm going with this. I mean, Sun seriously grabs you and then forces you to play with him, and if you try to leave, he will pick you up and put you right back in your place during the first part of this boss battle. So, I mean, like, if this dude was going around making kids feel uncomfortable and then ruining their innocence, I would expect it. So, yeah, don't put your kids in the FNAF daycare. That's all the time we have for today, friends. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been in Showerman Connor Monroe, and I'll see you in another video. Every time I bow, I cut the mic off and whatever.